First off, I just want to say that whatever you run as your 40th card in your deck is not gonna be like the most important part of your deck building. I know Brand Fusion went to 2, so everyone's trying to look for the best card to replace it, but most of the time it won't even matter. This is more of a video of discussing branded tech and questions that people have asked me about specific cards and why or why not to run them. And potentially you could use any of these cards to replace the third Brand Fusion in your deck with. So first off, I want to mention Foolish and Goldsark. If you were not running these cards before, I would highly recommend to run these now that Brand Fusion went to 2. Because these are probably the best consistency cards you can add to your deck. They have the least drawback. All of them, they basically just say, at minimum, they add Alibur. Foolish Burial for Tragedy or Goldsark for Tragedy adds Alibur to hand, and that's your starter. And on top of that, they're not just starters, they can be used as extenders if you already have access to a Brand Fusion. Since you can Foolish Burial stuff like potential Albaz or Albions to dump any brand trapped into the grave, or dump Retribution. Albaz makes Brand and Red Live. You can dump Lubellion itself, so you don't have to Brand Fusion for Albion. You can just dump Lubellion directly, or you can dump Sarnir too, which once again gets you any other brand spell trap. You can even dump Mercurior if you have a Bystial in hand, and then banish the Mercurior, and then that will get you your access to Cartesia. Same with Goldsark. Goldsark doesn't have to banish Tragedy if you already have Alibur. You can also, like, again, Goldsark, Mercurior, and that gets you any Fallen Valbaz card. So yeah, these are great. They're always have a use. They're starters and extenders, and I would, if you weren't running these before, definitely replace the third Brand Fusion with one of these. And another option is, I know a lot of branded deck lists are running above 40, so you could very easily just, with Brand Fusion going to 2, you could just run a smaller deck count. You don't have to replace, so that you could run it closer to 40. That way you still see your best cards more often. Just math, right? More consistency cards, you can play more Cartesia. Cartesia is not a one-card starter, per se, but Cartesia is really good if you have... First of all, it is a starter if you have it and access to, like, a Sarnir or Lubellion, since you can make Grand Guignol, dump Brand Fusion, and then the Sarnir will dump Retribution, then you can add Branded Fusion to your hand that way. It's also a very good extender if you already have access to Branded Fusion or Branded Opening. It's a little awkward if you have Alibur as well, because then you have to... it's really hard. It's kind of hard to special summon the Cartesia if you have to normal summon the Alibur as well, and you don't get an off fusion deployment. But yeah, it's definitely a decent choice to run as a Branded Fusion replacement. It won't completely replace Branded Fusion. It's unlike Foolish or Goldsark. It doesn't just get you a starter immediately. It's like a starter paired with other cards and an extender. But still, it's probably the main deck monster that adds the next most consistency, besides like more Aliburs or kits, which I'll get to that later. But another consistency starter that I like testing is Prosperity. So Prosperity is, first of all, you're gonna only be Prosperitying for 3 most of the time. Like, it's really, you're probably, unless you're somehow playing the deck where Super Poly is dead, and then you can potentially get rid of Super Poly targets. But most of the time, you're only gonna need Prosperitying for 3. So it doesn't, and because you're only Prosperitying for 3, there's also another issue in that it doesn't bait Ash, because if you Prosperity for 6, your opponent will be very inclined to Ash Prosperity if they have it, or at least more so than if you just banish 3, because if you just banish 3 off Prosperity, nobody is going to Ash that, so it doesn't really protect your Brand Fusion from Ash. But at the same time, The number of 1-card Brand Fusion in your deck basically went from like 10 copies to 9. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 Kit as your 9th. And that doesn't count the combinations where you have stuff like Lost, and an ability to fusion summon with something like a Cartesia, or just Cartesia and Sarnia or Lubellion, as previously mentioned. So, or Cartesia plus Tragedy. So, most likely, even if you only reveal 3 cards, right? If you didn't already have access to Brand Fusion in your hand, seeing 3 more cards, you're gonna see Brand Fusion anyways. And the other benefit of Prosperity is, if you already have Brand Fusion, since you are still more likely to open a copy of it than not, right? You can potentially add stuff. Prosperity can potentially get you non-engine cards that you can use to help protect your Prosperity, such as Called by the Grave and Crossout Designator. It's also pretty decent going second, because with Prosperity, you can reveal 3 and your opponent either negates it, or if they don't negate it, you have a chance to reveal Super Poly off of it. And if you just reveal Super Poly and add to your hand, there's nothing like they can really do about it. They've already let you add the Super Poly to your hand. You have an unrespondable board breaker that they just let you add. So yeah, that's another benefit of Prosperity, is probably the thing I'm going to be testing first in the 40th slot. And the things that the 3 cards I would banish most of the time off Prosperity are going to be the 2 targets off Proskenion, Proskenion off Grand Guignol that you summon, such as Proskenion, the Despia Corides, and an Albal Lenitus if you run it. And I would potentially get rid of 1 Muddragon target, or 1 Super Poly target, depending on what I'm facing. If I know Muddragon is not good against it, or Garua's not good against the matchup, then I'll get rid of that. But you can also get rid of Sprin the Iron, like your Flex 15th monster, 15th Albas fusion. That's literally just something that you send off Mirror Jade or send off Grand Guignol. You can get rid of Brigand too, or sometimes even the second Mirror Jade, because most of the time you only go into use 1 Mirror Jade and then you can recycle it back infinitely. So it's like, yeah, you have some choices for the 3rd banish off Prosperity. And the next consistently card that you could replace as your 40th card is, you have been asking me about Branded in High Spirits. So Branded in High Spirits, basically, if you open up one of these monsters, basically any of these that have Albas in their name, because you don't gain anything from really discarding like Alibur or anything. So if you have Branded in High Spirits with one of these monsters, an Albas or a Bystial Sarnier, what you do is you discard, you send that card to the grave, and then you send a fusion monster 2500 attack of the same type. So often you can send one of the Solid fusions that has an end phase effect, and then you get a free value off that way. Then you discard the monster. Then you can add any monster dimensions fallen with Albas, so you can add any of these cards to your hand. And it is really good. It basically lets you add any. If you can get it off, it basically gets you your starter right there, because at minimum you can add a kit. And it also, like Foolish and Goatsark, it can act as an extender too if you already have access to Brand Fusion, because you can get any Albas monster. You can get Mercurier for protection or as like a disruption. You can get Cartesia as an extender. So yeah, it's really, if it goes off, it's actually pretty decent. But the problem I had with Branded High Spirits in this particular build is I don't have too many targets that I want to discard a lot of the time, because I'm only running singular copies of Albion, Mercurier, Kit, and Cartesia, and only 2 Albas, and along with the 3 Sarnier. Those are the only targets that you would discard off High Spirits. And even then, like, I don't want to discard, like, if I have Cartesia in my hand, I don't really want to discard it unless my hand's absolutely dead. And if I have to use Brand. If I don't own Brand Fusion and I have to use Brand and High Spirits to add kit to start my plays, like I'm discarding 2 cards from my hand. Like basically, I'm discarding 1 card for High Spirits, then I'm putting 1 card back of kit. So like I'm losing a lot of hand size right there. Like just imagine if I had a Super Poly in hand too. Well, I probably wouldn't anymore. I'd probably put back the Super Poly because I wouldn't have enough cards in hand to actually even use it anymore. So it's cool as an extender. It's technically, so yeah, technically this does get you started, but I don't want to use it to start my plays because it's very, very costly that way. But if you do want to test Brand and High Spirits out, right, I would advise to probably run more copies of these Albaz monsters just to get more targets for it, you know, because obviously opening with Sarnier is the best, but even if you discard Sarnier for High Spirits, right, that means you don't have the Sarnier line to banish the Mercurier, so you're locked. You can't. It gets rid of your ability to do the Rindrum line where you send Mercurier and then banish if you're Sarnier, so that you're getting rid of them. The only card in your hand that's really a ideal discard is Albaz. All the other cards that you discard for High Spirits all have use in your hand already, and you're just getting rid of them. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Brand and High Spirit. And those are the main consistency cards that I think you can replace Brand Fusion with. There's another way you can, more other cards you can use to replace Brand Fusion are engine requirements, stuff that aren't starters. Like they don't really help you play the game, but they're additional cards you can access when you can play the game and you have your engines going, such as more Brand Spell and Trap. Other spell Brand Spell Traps are like the Regain and Beast cards. Personally, I'm not a fan of running these in branded Bystial because, first of all, we're running a much lower Bystial count, right? So you're not gonna really get value off these as much as you would, say, in like a Dragon deck. And secondly, most of the time, the thing you get off the Bellion is going to be lost if you don't already have lost. So, and most of the time, like that means you're gonna these are gonna be in your deck, but you're not even gonna add them off the Bellion because you don't have lost. So, and you want to prioritize lost first, since it gets value and it protects your plays. So it's like most of the time these aren't going to be involved in your games, or they're not going to be targets you want to search, and then they're like kind of risks because you have less Bystials to get value off them. It's like, yeah, I'm not a fan of running them, at least at this type of random build. Same with Brand and White. The combo lines that use Brand and White, I've completely cut them, and I've just moved on to using Brand and Red in Brand and White's place. So you get 90% of the utility that Brand and White has with Brand and Red, and you save yourself a deck slot with it. You could also run more Bystials. Like you could run like Magnum Butt, and then as a way to search Sarnier, you can even run Druiswormer stuff. The reason I cut on my Bystials is because I had a really tough Sprite matchup, and I wanted more cards for Sprite. So I basically just cut extra Bystials to put in Super Polys for Sprite. That's basically it. If you're confident then that you have a solid game plan against Sprite, you can put in more Bystials again, because having Bystials, they're not starters, but they're good because they let you go into Rindrum lines with Brand Fusion, which are the strongest lines that you have, the strongest Brand Fusion lines available. And those are potential engine requirements you can use. Next are the miscellaneous cards, the non-engine and non-consistency cards that you could slot in as your 40th card. First off, Crossout. I feel like you should probably be running Crossout if you're playing Brand Despia, and if you weren't running it already, since Maxi and Ash Blossom are pains in the ass to deal with. Like it's just nice to just have a blanket out to those, and occasionally you can blow out the mirror match with Crossout Designator. I've crossed outed Brand Fusion before. I've crossed outed my opponent's Brand Expulsion when they were about to puppet lock me. That felt amazing. I've run my own Brand Expulsion. Crossout Designator, that was awful. I had nearly lost the game due to that. So yeah, with there's like additional utility you can have just because Brand is a popular deck in the meta and Crossout and mirror matches is cracked, but just saying negate Ash Blossom, which is the single most impactful card against your deck, and on top of that hits Maxi, I think that's a worthy slot in your deck. Another card that I already mentioned was Super Poly. This is mainly because Sprite is a really tough matchup for this deck. Like, it runs a lot of Handtraps, which are annoying. It can run Bystials, and on top of that, your Handtraps are not really super effective against Sprite plays. Like, aside from maxing resolving, Ash doesn't do a whole lot. It stops like a third of their combo at most. And honestly, the best use for Ash Blossoms is to hold this for your turn and pray they go for carrots so that you can Ash their caddy, and that way you remove like 2 interruptions from their board with 1 Ash instead of just like hoping and praying they don't have more level 2 monsters. But yeah, it's not really reliable if you just rely on Handtrap. Especially in Brand Despia, we don't have that much room to run Handtraps, and Bystials are like literally do nothing against Sprite. So Super Poly is card that's useful going first and second, and it's useful for dealing with Sprite boards where your other non-engine normally would not. And it's good in the mirror match too. And it's not great versus tier, but it's like it is usable. But it's good against 2 of the top 3 most played decks, and it's good against dragons too, actually. So. And any other deck playing Bystials. So yeah, this is just a really good card in the meta right now. But obviously, if you weren't running Super Poly before and you want to run Super Poly, you're probably gonna want to fit in all 3 copies. So it's gonna be, you need to find space for more than just 1 card slot. You need to find space for 3 Super Polys if you're gonna run these, probably, because that's, you know, if you're gonna run this, you're probably running it because you want to draw it, right? You could also run more Handtraps, which is like in Brand Despia, I'm not the biggest fan of running more Handtraps just because you don't have room to run. Like, Handtraps get better the more you run of them, because then you have a better chance of opening 2 Handtraps, right? And 1 Handtrap is not stopping anything this meta, unless it's specifically Ash Blossom on Brand Infusion. Like, you really need to draw at least 2 relevant Handtraps to stop your opponent from playing. Even then, it's not always effective, but at least it gives you a chance. Like, 1 is never enough, and there's not enough space in Brand Despia, I feel, to be able to run enough Handtraps to where you can draw 2 consistently. And at this point, you're probably running Infirm as like a cross-out target at that point, and you're running like a 1-off or a 1-off that you don't want to draw. To me, that's not super worth without changing the deck completely again and trying to fit in more Handtraps, which would mean probably cutting the Super Polys too. And the last thing I want to mention that you can run in the 40th slot now, and I think is really funny, is the Aqua Dolphin package. This was a thing in TCG that people cited in going first. Basically, the idea is you fusion deployment out Neo-Spacian Aqua Dolphin. Then you discard a card and you look at your opponent's hand and you discard basically any monster that has less attack than the monster you control on the field. So Neo-Spacian Aqua Dolphin has 600 attack and Ash Blossom has 0 attack. So you can see where you're going with this, right? You fusion deployment out Aqua Dolphin and you get to look at their hand, and this specifically beats Ash Blossom, but it also lets you see, it gives you hand knowledge too. And you can see what other hand your opponent has, or you can see what your opponent's playing, you can set up your board accordingly. And the fusion you use to reveal off fusion deployment, the special summon Aqua Dolphin, is Elemental Hero Aqua Neos. I don't think this is particularly good in Master Duel because you don't know when you're going first or second. So obviously, if you're going second, you probably don't want to fusion deployment for Neo-Spacian Aqua Dolphin. On top of that, this costs an extra deck slot, so this is more just a meme than anything. But it is funny. I will say that. And with Crossout at 1, we have less ways to deal with Ash, to beat Ash, than the TG had, which had 3 Crossout designators. So this basically turns your fusion deployments into potential ways to beat Ashe, but also it also does not beat Max C, so you know, keep that in mind. You know, it's not, there's other problems to deal with in Master Duel. Well, yeah, that's basically my thoughts on the card that Brandon can run to replace the third Brandon fusion. I'm gonna have timestamps of all the cards I discussed if you want to go back and hear my thoughts on them again. And you'll check out my other videos on Brand Despia, my combo video tutorials and my gameplay of this deck in Master ranks.